or I'm thinking about some things in Western environmental philosophy and thinking about whether Asia might be a counterexample to some ideological explanations of environmental degradation. So that's the title also of my talk. Also, I would like to apologize. I have a sore throat and maybe you can't hear me very well. I don't know, but I'll do my best. So, so what I would like to talk about is first, in a more general sense, what I mean by explanations of environmental degradation. And then I want to suggest that we can distinguish two types of theories of why environmental degradation occurs: ideological theories and what I call technical theories. Maybe not the best terms, maybe you can suggest other terms, I don't know, but that's a sort of suggestion. And having made that distinction, I would like then to say why it might be that Asia is a counterexample to the ideological version of those theories. And I will summarize briefly in the conclusion. So here we are with what I mean by theories about the causes of environmental degradation. First, environmental degradation, I have in mind the modification of our environment and modification on a large scale and also harmful. It should be harmful from our perspective, at least. So examples of that are, of course, climate change, the massive extinction of species, or maybe loss of biodiversity in general. Now, we can distinguish, we can ask, okay, why does that occur? Why do we have environmental degradation? And then one can give what I call here a micro level explanation. One can just say, okay, climate change, for example, is caused by higher concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that's it. But of course, in philosophy especially, we are interested in theories that we might call operating on a macro level, where we try to be more profound, more deeper, should be a deeper explanation. And so, for example, some people say the Christian religion and its anthropocentrism is the cause of the ecological crisis. Right? And this second sort of theory, that those operating on the macro level, is this sort of theory that I'm interested in and that I would like to talk about, not the other micro level. Okay. And so within these macro level theories, I would like to suggest the distinction I mentioned between theories that are might be called ideological and theories that might be called just technical. So when I say ideological theories, I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way. When you think of ideologies, we think of maybe systems of ideas that someone holds on to irrationally and in a way that is really harmful or something like that. I don't mean that. I just mean theories that are based on what people think, on the ideas that humans have in their head, right, about their relation to the rest of nature. So in that sense, ideological, in the sense of based on ideas. And so ideological theories of environmental degradation would say we have the wrong ideas as to how we are related to the rest of nature. And these wrong ideas cause the environmental degradation. Then by contrast, technical theories would be theories that are based on the instruments or the technology, we might say, that we use for getting on with our lives. These theories would say that we use the wrong technology for getting on with our lives. It's the wrong technology because it produces unwanted consequences, namely environmental degradation. So that is the general distinction between ideological and technical theories. So let me give some examples of either of these. So first, the ideological explanations of environmental degradation. And here I have, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm using fairly old literature here, but it's to illustrate the distinction. So the prime example would be Lynn White, this author who says that in his article, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, he thinks that the religion is wrong. Yeah, and of course I'm talking about Western countries. Right? He thinks that it's thanks to Christianity that humans consider themselves apart from and superior to nature, that they have an anthropocentric outlook on nature. And it's also because of Christianity that they developed science. Why? Because science is motivated by trying to rethink God's thoughts, right? It's trying to get closer to God by understanding what went on in his mind when he made the creation. And furthermore, according to the scriptures, God told us to dominate nature and use it basically as we wished, right? And so all of that outlook on nature, those ideas about nature, are responsible for producing the ecological crisis. That would be his explanation. And having that explanation, that diagnosis, we also can see what the solution is. We have to change the religion, right? So for example, either within Christianity, you should orient your thinking more according to this Saint Francis of Assisi, because he was someone interested in nature, non-human nature. Then Buddhism would be another option, but of course that might be more difficult for people just to change in such a radical way their religion, right? But it's just sort of mentioned as an option. A second example of an ideological explanation would be not to focus on religion, but to focus on philosophy. The philosophy that people have is the culprit, namely their metaphysics. So again, it is about ideas. And here I've mentioned Arne Næss, this Norwegian. He thinks that atomistic individualism is in some sense responsible for us getting into the ecological crisis and environmental degradation. We think of each individual as having a separate essence, and that makes us selfish towards other people and also selfish towards nature. So again, it's the wrong ideas that produce the ecological crisis. And the solution, of course, is then to change your metaphysics. This philosopher thought we should become Spinocists, where as a consequence, we will no longer think of us as separate essences from nature. Rather, there would be only one substance, one essence, and we will think of us as one with nature. And thereby, the environment problems might be solved. So those were the ideological explanations. Now, as to technical explanations. What might those be? Sorry. So here we have the idea that the technology we use to get on with our lives produces environmental degradation. We don't want such degradation. Hence, what we have to do is we have to improve our technology such that it no longer produces such degradation. And here, when I use the term technology, we might think in the normal way of all kinds of machines, devices, processes, etc., to used to solve practical problems. But we can also think of what we might call social technology. That's to say, ways of organizing and administering society and natural resources, institutions and such. So here, another example, that's another classic and also a bit older text, that would be Gareth Hardin and his idea of the tragedy of the commons. So he argues that environmental problems, at least some of them, are caused by a wrong administration of goods, environmental goods that we share, that we are the that are common to a group of people, and all of them together are the owners. Whenever we have a group of people and they together own some natural resource, he thinks that such collective ownership will always tend to deteriorate the natural resource. Why? Because individuals will always have an incentive to profit from this collective resource at the expense of all others. They will always try to get a little bit more, and as a consequence, eventually the common natural good will be destroyed. His solution is, well, to change the administration. So we should privatize common property, right? So that every farmer has his little piece of land, rather than many farmers having some piece of land together, for example. That's one possibility, privatize. The other is put it under the control of the state, an external authority that vigilates, that controls everything that happens. Very sort of, I don't know, very few options in Harding's view of things. And of course, also the problem was that his theory wasn't underpinned really by empirical research. So we get Elinor Ostrom, who argued against Harding, and what she did, she actually looked at examples of collective ownership in the real world, right? And she found that the administration of common natural resources actually works very well in many instances. There are lots of cases where it has worked really well in many parts all over the world, and especially among indigenous communities. So maybe Harding's ideas about what the common ownership necessarily leads to wrong administration isn't very convincing. And by looking at real cases that are successful, we can find way better ways of trying to administer common resources. Okay, that's the examples of technical explanations of environmental degradation. Now, what about Asia in that context? And I don't know, I hope it's not too simplistic what I'm suggesting, but I was just thinking that, well, we get, I think, environmental degradation, we get that in many parts of Asia also. But not those parts aren't necessarily Christian, of course. Christianity isn't so common in Asia, especially say China or Japan or Indonesia or the whole of the Middle East. There are many parts that are not Christian, very, very few Christians there, but you still get environmental degradation. So to say that Christianity causes environmental degradation, at least, well, we have to give a few more arguments to explain how that could hold, given that we have this fact that we have countries that are not Christian, and yet they have also problems with the environment. And the other the ideological explanation about metaphysics, well, also there I don't know too much. We can ask, for example, are Asians atomistic individualists? Right? Because as Arne Næss said, atomistic individualism is responsible for the ecological crisis. And there, I don't know, but it's at least a rare accusation for East Asian countries, for example, to say that they are too individualist, right? I mean, normally it's sort of the other way around, that you say, oh no, the Asians, they are collectivist, and rather the Western part is the individualist part, so, right? So that's doesn't really fit here, right? So if we take all of that together, then it seems that at least with regard to the ideological explanations that I suggested as examples, it seems that Asia could be, in parts at least, a counterexample to these explanations. We need to find a different explanation of environmental degradation. And that might be the perhaps technical explanations. I don't know. So what follows from this? Well, if we want to maintain an ideological explanation, if we think that's the only way, or if that's we need such a sort of deep explanation of environmental problems, then it would seem necessary that we have to find ideas that are shared between Asia and other regions that have experienced environmental degradation, right? Because if there's to be one single explanation of environmental degradation and it's to be based on ideas, well then they have to be ideas that we find everywhere, right? Maybe not that promising, or I don't know. Maybe you can tell me more about that. Furthermore, if we look at Ostrom, I mentioned Ostrom and her diverse examples of successful administration of the commons. For example, she looks at Switzerland, Japan, Spain, and the Philippines, right? So very different regions of the world. All of these are examples of successful administration of the commons. Again, it seems unlikely that all these communities share a substantive ideology about the environment. Maybe they share sort of ways of administering it, but an ideology, that seems less likely. In general, I would just suggest that we need someone like Ostrom. That's to say, someone who does an empirical investigation, right? If we want to know whether the ideological explanations really make any sense. So someone who looks at the association between ideas in people's heads and environmental degradation, if we want to maintain ideological explanations of environmental degradation. Okay. So and that's it. Here is my conclusion in summary. So my question was, why does the environment deteriorate? I would like to have a sort of deep explanation for that. I looked at two ways of explaining: ideological explanations and technical explanations. I then noticed that environmental degradation occurs in many parts of Asia where people are not Christian or particularly individualist, as claimed by as a cause for degradation by the ideological explanations. So these parts of Asia would seem to constitute counterexamples to ideological explanations. So perhaps technical explanations are more promising. And if there are successful examples of managing the environment in Asia, it might be that they are more important for their technical characteristics than their ideological ones. Technical in the sense of maybe the way of administering common resources, for example. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. I noticed that in Japan it's very late. Here it's early, but thank you very much.